Hi guys, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to our channel, and in this video I'm going to talk about vulnerability management, one of the most key effective service which a SOC has to offer so that the overall security posture management of your enterprise can be improved over the period of time. Okay, now in the last video we have discussed about a very basic concept, and which is what exactly vulnerability is all about. Whereas in this video, we are going to talk about what is vulnerability management. What are the different stages of vulnerability management and what are the best practices for all these stages? Okay. Now, there is a very specific agenda behind creating this playlist because now we are going to talk about cyber security as a whole instead of just understanding products. Okay, so there will be product specific capabilities which will be covered in different videos, but now our target is to understand how exactly the entire SOC is being designed, orchestrated, or modernized. Okay, now one more thing which I would like to suggest you all, and that is open a browser and just type NIST cybersecurity framework and you will be routed to this particular document. Okay, it's the basic one. It's just listing down the capabilities which should exist for each of the category. And if you will go to the protect section where I am right now, you can see vulnerability management is getting mentioned over here. So that's the reason why it is very important for you to understand what exactly vulnerability management is all about. Okay, now this is the deck which I have used in my last video where I was discussing how security of your enterprise is inversely proportional to vulnerabilities, because the more vulnerability will exist in your environment, the less secure your enterprise will be, right? Because there are more weaknesses which can be compromised by a cyber threat actor or an adversary. And that's the reason why vulnerability management is the key service of your SOC. There are many other services, but vulnerability management is one of the key service that a SOC has to perform. Okay. Now let's talk about the very basic, the definition itself. Vulnerability management is an iterative process that's followed to make sure all the vulnerabilities that exist in your environment are remediated in timely fashion. Now, this last section of this particular statement is exceptionally important because understand that not all the vulnerabilities are going to have same impact. Okay, some vulnerabilities might have caused incidents in other enterprises, right? That means there is a public documentation that's available for that vulnerability wherein it can act as a threat to your environment. It's the weakest link which a cyber threat actor can use to perform an exploit. Okay, so in this cases, prioritization of vulnerability is very important, and then making sure the vulnerabilities which have huge impact or very broader impact should get resolved first. And that's the purpose behind mentioning this last section, which says make sure they are getting remediated in timely fashion. Okay, now when we talk about vulnerability management, now, basically, it's a capability that's available with most of the security products, but the basic challenge is there are different products for each and every digital state. I mean, for network, you have vulnerability scanners. For endpoints, you have vulnerability management solutions, right? Similarly, there are certain solutions which exist at the identity layer, right? Now, what we are going to talk about is a holistic view of how exactly vulnerability management is actually defined and what are the practices or what is the sort of thought process that you should have to make sure you're doing the right assessment or making sure you are doing the right sort of configuration in your security products so that you can get the best outcome. Now, there could be two different initiatives. One is from an enterprise perspective in terms of keeping a track how much or how secure or how valuable vulnerability management am I doing at each and every digital state, and then a holistic view of the entire organization, right? Because think about this, for a SOC, vulnerability management can be targeted in terms of making sure each and every state is getting secured. It's not only about endpoint or it's not only about network. It's making sure that the vulnerabilities that exist at the organization layer itself, I mean at the organization level, that should be resolved. Okay, so basically it's a 6 stage process which starts from discovery, asset inventory, then information management, risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, report and remediate, and then respond. So now let's start off by knowing the first stage itself, which is basically discovery or asset inventory. Now, this is a very common statement which you might have already read in some of the security documentation, that you can't protect an entity which you are not aware of. I mean, think about a scenario wherein you need to make sure that all the entities that exist in your environment, be it user, be it endpoint, be it network appliances, be it anything that exists in digital state, you are having a proper inventory management for that. Okay. In this case, none of your entity belonging to any of the digital state will be left unattended, right? I mean, if there will be any vulnerability that exists in any of these entity in any of the digital state, it will be discovered and you will be able to fix it, right? So think about a scenario. If I talk about identity itself, I mean, there could be user accounts and service accounts, and they both can exist in multiple locations, let's say in your on-prem AD or some of your cloud solutions, right? But what you have to make sure that all these accounts that exist or that belongs to your enterprise, they must be secured. I mean, there could be any solution, any identity solution that can let you know that what are the vulnerabilities that exist with a specific user object, to be very precise. I mean, to make it more relatable, understand that out of all the users that exist in your enterprise, these 50 users don't have MFA enabled. Okay, just a relative example. Now, if I talk about the endpoint, what you have to make sure that all the devices that your users are using, all the VMs, all the servers, all the VMs in your polycloud environments, in your on-prem environments, must be onboarded to a vulnerability management solution or some security solution that offers you the capability of vulnerability management, so that you can actually go ahead and remediate those vulnerabilities, right? Now, think about this. If you have 1,000 devices on 800 devices, you are doing the effective vulnerability management, but in the remaining 200 devices, there is no as such capability. I mean, they are not onboarded to the right set of security solutions. There is a very big gap, that exists and which has to be fixed. Okay. And similarly, if I talk about the network layer itself, okay, think about a compromise which will impact your enterprise if the network layer or any device that is sitting or that exists in your network layer is getting compromised. Now, this could be a simple misconfiguration in a firewall rule wherein some random ports are allowed for even, let's say, outgoing or incoming connections, right? Think about these weaknesses, think about these loopholes as an asset which your or which a cyber threat actor or an adversary can use to initiate an exploit. Okay, so when we talk about discovery, when we talk about asset inventory, the first stage of vulnerability management, you need to make sure that there is a typical inventory about each and every entity that belongs to your enterprise. Now, whatever we have discussed till now was typically focused to IT security, right? Now, think about yourself as a manufacturing unit, right? You will have OT networks wherein, let's say, there are multiple sensors reporting some data to some of your cloud service, or let's say there are multiple CCTV cameras which are getting connected to different resources so that they can report a set of information which they are intended to. Okay. In this case also, you need to make sure all the vulnerabilities that exist in your OT network has to be fixed. And the very obvious reason for getting these kind of vulnerabilities fixed or highlighted is by simply making sure that we are getting all these entities onboarded to their respective security solutions or the security solutions which are offering vulnerability management for a specific digital state or let's say OT network or let's say IoT devices. Okay, so if I talk about the first stage, it's the discovery model. It's basically the inventory management, wherein we have to make sure everything which has to be protected does exist or is onboarded to any of the security solution, right? Now think about the second stage. Okay, now this will be typically related moreover to your security solutions, but still you can use this insight to make sure that the right set of information is actually getting captured. Okay, now let me just read out this statement and then things will make a lot more sense. When we talk about information management, it typically means what kind of information is being collected from the assets that you have discovered and onboarded to the respective security solution. Let me give you an example and then things will be more relatable. Think about a scenario wherein you have a vulnerability management solution for your endpoints, which can let you know about the vulnerabilities that exist at the OS layer. Okay, but is it enough? The answer to that is absolutely no. Because when we talk about endpoint, think about the complications which endpoint has. It typically starts from the firmware layer itself. Okay, then you have OS, then you have applications, and then there are multiple other services which exist wherein vulnerabilities can exist. Now, the other aspect is I have a vulnerability solution or vulnerability management capability in one of my security solution, and that can let me know the vulnerabilities which exist at the OS layer as well as at the application layer. I mean, the same vulnerability management solution is giving me the capability to go ahead and check what are the applications that exist on that particular devices and if there is any vulnerability that exists on a specific build or specific version of an application, right? The second scenario is more insightful. Okay, similarly, if I talk about the network layer, okay, think about a scenario wherein you have NAC in place. I mean, none of the unauthorized device will get access to your enterprise network. It's a good practice, right? I mean, we are capturing the right set of information, and if the information provided by a device is actually fulfilling your standards or is actually complying to the configuration that you have, then only they are getting access. Okay. Similarly, you have port scanners, right? I mean, port scanner is a kind of a capability that can actually go ahead and scan for vulnerabilities wherein some random ports are allowed to in some of the network appliance or some network device altogether. Okay. Now, relate these two examples as an idea behind collecting more effective information so that vulnerability management can be more emphasized in terms of showing the right set of information, right? And let me tell you, at times there will be scenarios wherein the information that is getting captured by a security solution will be too much. I mean, there are instances wherein you'll end up knowing that this kind of information is not even relative, or this kind of information is not even going to help you in terms of doing effective vulnerability management. So if I talk about the second stage, it's all about how much deep analytics is being done for each and every entity layer, and typically which makes sense. I mean, there should be ample amount of data that is getting captured for each and every digital state, and it should be logical. I mean, the data which is getting captured from these entities should give you the results which are actually useful, rather than just randomly collecting events or some other information. Okay, now think about a scenario. You have onboarded the devices, you have done the proper inventory management. Now you are also aware that what kind of information is getting captured. The next phase is risk assessment. Okay, now again, I would like to summarize this with a statement, and that is every vulnerability that exists in your environment will not have the same impact. I mean, there should be a process of prioritization of vulnerabilities, right? Now, let me explain this also with an example. I have a file server that exists in data center, and I also have a file server that exists in my sandbox environment, right? Now, I have onboarded them to my vulnerability management solution. I'm aware about the information which is getting captured to show me security insights. And now my vulnerability management solution is actually showing me two different vulnerabilities. One is for my sandbox environment, and the other one is for my production server. I mean, the server that exists in data center. Now, if we talk about practicality, if we talk about how things should be related, or how you should work upon these kind of insights that you are getting, the vulnerability that exists in your data center has to be prioritized, right? I mean, because the risk is much more broader. I mean, if a compromise is happening in your production environment, it is going to have more impact than a compromise happening in your dev environment, right? Now, based on the certain inputs that you will provide to your security solution, this prioritization is going to happen. But again, there are certain aspects which are built in to your security product. Now, what do I mean by this? That let's say there is a vulnerability that exists in both of these machines, right? But then there is a vulnerability which is a threat. I mean, there are known incidents. In this case, the threat vulnerability will get prioritized. But the other case, wherein we are talking about the vulnerabilities which are existing on different machines based on their value system. I mean, this file server that exists in data center will have more value for your enterprise. In this case, for sure, the vulnerability that exists in data center has to be fixed first. Okay, so basically prioritizing vulnerabilities based on the impact which it can result in is risk assessment. And as I've said before, most of the security solutions will offer you this capability by default. But again, their insights in terms of getting vulnerability prioritized will be majorly focused towards the public data, or the relative incidents which have happened already. Okay, but when it comes to your input, okay, you can actually let your security solution know that, okay, these are the servers, or these are the devices which are high value assets for me. So if there is any vulnerability that exists for these devices or for these servers, they have to be prioritized. Okay, now risk assessment is a two-way approach, again, which the first one lies with the security solution itself, and the other one is based on the inputs, based on the configuration that you are going to do to make sure the right set of vulnerabilities are getting prioritized. Okay, now you have done risk assessment. Let's talk about vulnerability assessment. Okay, think about a process wherein I have multiple machines and all of them were showing vulnerabilities, and then there is a decent amount of time which one of my SOC analyst has invested, and now he or she has categorized the vulnerabilities into three different segments. The first one is critical one or high, let's say. Then you have medium, and then you have low vulnerabilities. Okay, these are the three different categories. Now think about this. A SOC analyst will not go ahead and install a security patch, or will not go ahead and push a security patch to a system, right? In this case, what typically the requirement is that your SOC model, I mean the resultant values of the security capabilities which a security solution has to offer, is actually getting mapped to your ITSM model. I mean, there should be an automated flow in terms of the assessment that has to be done for a vulnerability, wherein if any vulnerability is getting detected by your security solution, there should be a case getting registered in your ITSM tool or in your ITSM solution, so that the relative set of people can actually work on it and get that vulnerability fixed for you. And that's what typically vulnerability assessment is all about. Okay, now think about this. You have onboarded the devices, you're making sure the right set of information is getting captured. On behalf of those information which is getting captured, risk assessment is happening, as well as cases are getting managed by your ITSM team. Okay, now the next stage is report and remediate. Now, a report is a very common word, and it is super simple for us to relate that any tool that is capturing any kind of data will provide you reports. Okay, but then there is something called report and remediate. Now, what does this typically mean? Think about a scenario wherein there are four different devices that exist in your enterprise which have vulnerabilities. What will be the typical flow altogether? A SOC analyst will log into your security solution, and then he will see that these are the updates which are missing at the OS layer itself. The SOC analyst will create an IT task, then that IT guy will, let's say, create a policy or even contact users to make them understand, get the machines restarted, whatever it is. There is a certain process which your IT team would do, okay? And then they will close the case at their end in the ITSM tool, and then the security task from the SOC analyst will also get fixed, okay? Or will also get closed, okay? Now think about this. This process can be manual or can be automatic, right? There could be an automated process that you can develop wherein you're making sure your security solutions are working with your ITSM tool seamlessly. Now, this is the most hard part. I mean, talking about the integration, we'll come to that in a lot more detail. But think about this. This process can be manual, can be automated. It could be both of them, right? But what we have to understand here is impact. On behalf of the impact which a vulnerability can make, there will be different workflows that you're going to define. There will be different remediation actions that you're going to define. Now, what do I mean by this? This example was pretty simple. But if we talk about one of the complex scenarios, wherein let's say a server requires a patch to be added or deployed, and after that patch, again, the server has to be restarted. Now think about this as a scenario wherein this server is very important node in the app which is getting used by your users. I mean, there are multiple services which are binded to an application, and this server is somewhere in the architecture which has a very huge importance. Now, in this case, installing a security patch, getting that server restarted requires a downtime. Okay, so in this case, when it comes to the workflow that you are defining, okay, the process that you are defining for remediation will be absolutely different as compared to the example which we have just discussed, right? In this case, your security team might need to work with the application team as well so that they can actually schedule for a downtime and then make sure the security is taken care of. Okay, so basically, when we talk about report and remediate, you are actually going to define the different processes. I mean, if a certain type of vulnerability exists, whether a manual process should be triggered. I mean, defining workflows, right? Or it should be semi-automatic, or it should be automatic. For those vulnerabilities for which you are getting stable remediation actions, you can actually automate them, right? So when we talk about report and remediate, it's basically the stage wherein you're going to define workflows for the remediation actions based on all the information that you have captured from the previous four different stages. Okay, now let's talk about the last one, which is the most important one, and that is respond. Based on the workflows that you have defined in report and remediate section, you need to make sure that the actions are actually getting executed. Okay, now what do I mean by this? That it's very easy to define a workflow. I mean, it's super simple. Anybody who has the capability to perform certain analytics will be able to define a workflow. Okay, but the actual reality is to make it work on the ground. I mean, the situations wherein you have multiple security solutions, you have SIM, you have vulnerability management for your network devices, you have vulnerability management for your endpoints, for identities. The actual practicality and the actual capability is tested when something which has been defined in a workflow is actually working on the ground, is actually working when you have multiple technologies or multiple security products working in conjunction with each other. Okay, now this is the most difficult task, I'll tell you honestly, because we know not every solution offers you the capability to have the best interoperability, between different services, right? But still we have to make sure that all the workflows that we have defined in the remediation section, I mean, we know that for these kind of vulnerabilities, we can have automated actions, or for these kind of vulnerabilities, there should be a manual process. I mean, whatever you have defined, okay, in the remediation section, there should be a response or there should be a respond mechanism for that as well. And that's what you will do in the last stage. Okay. Now, one more aspect which is very important, and think about it, that when you will start working on these details at each and every stage, think about the intelligence that you will build. Think about the kind of maturity which your data is going to have, right? Think about a scenario wherein you are doing this kind of analysis on a weekly basis or bi-weekly or even a monthly basis, right? There could be a possibility wherein you are actually revisiting the entire vulnerability management for your organization 12 times a year, right? If we talk about the least possible count of finding loopholes, it will be at least 6 times wherein you are getting some new information which you can introduce, though it will be always Every time you will visit this entire cycle or this entire process in terms of maturing your vulnerability management for your enterprise, you will find loopholes. Every time you will find something new that can be introduced. Okay, so it's a very, what should I say, intelligent, or it's a very productive journey, or very efficient journey, that will help you to build a lot of intelligence. And some of the examples, right? Think about a scenario. By this stage, you will for sure know that how many vulnerabilities are repetitive. Just an example, okay? How many vulnerabilities have actually stable remediation action? I mean, if in the first month wherein you started defining this process, there were something, or there were some remediation actions which were manual, right? Now this is your responsibility to make sure that they should get automated if they have stable remediation actions, right? And then these kind of common practices which you are giving, there is a lot of time investment which is required in these kind of activities, and that's why SOC is so important for an enterprise, irrespective of the business type which it is protecting. Okay, now when we talk about respond, to summarize, make sure all the remediation workflows that you are defining, they are actually getting executed on the ground. They're actually working with different solutions and technologies that you have, and then do an analysis, right? That based on all this telemetry that you have captured, what are the new things that can be introduced, and then again start from the discovery section, right? And that's why I have mentioned that it's an iterative process that has to be done in terms of making sure the maturity model when it comes to security of your enterprise gets evolved over the period of time. Okay, now two more very common words: detect and respond. Okay, you might have heard about them already. Now I'm leaving you guys with a thought that, think about it. According to me, if I talk about detection and respond, discovery, asset inventory, information management, risk assessment, and vulnerability assessment will somewhere